Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello, and thank you for downloading The Mind Matters here on Wisp Sports. This is Season 2, Episode 1, and I'm Chris Stafford. And the important part of this duo is...
I'm Jenny Susser. I don't know about that, but thank you. I'll take it.
Happy New Year. It's not too late, is it?
Borderline, but thank you. Yeah, Happy New Year. We're very serious in this podcast.
Very serious. We're off to another cracking start with The Mind Matters. And if you've joined us in the previous season, you'll know we talk about just about anything that involves athletes, but sport and the wider issues of women's sports as well. And this week, because we are so well prepared, Jenny, on this show, we're prepped, we're so ready. I mean, the research that goes into it, the hours and hours of preparation. Don't you think our listeners should at least be aware of that and how, you know, we are so ready for recording each episode?
Yeah, just because you called me yesterday and said, can you tape a podcast tomorrow?
And the topic we decided was literally just before we hit record.
Yeah, but you're giving away all of our secrets.
I suppose I am. But you know, if the audience is still with us and thinking that we're either going to talk a load of rubbish or... This is a very English expression, isn't it? You wouldn't say that.
It is. I was just going to say that, yeah.
So we hope we turn this into a riveting conversation for you that you are so compelled to listen to and will be with us for the next 20 minutes or so. But the topic, Jenny, is...
cheating and steroid use. The psychology of... ...
The psychology thereof. Because it occurred to me, Jenny, you know, when you see so much cheating happening over the years, not just amongst Russia, and they get their knuckles wrapped, they get penalized, they get banned and fined, all of the rest of that, and other athletes too. It's not just Russia. But this has been going on since time immemorial, and it just gets worse in some more sophisticated. If anybody watched the film Icarus, they will know how sophisticated it can be. But what I was curious about, Jenny, which is why I raised this just literally 1 minute before we came on air, was the mentality behind that, the psychology behind that, when athletes know they're going to get caught, and some of them are repeat offenders, but why don't they learn from this? They're not stupid. They're intelligent athletes. You know, and they know the penalty. They know they can be banned for life, and yet they still do it.
Yeah, the psychology behind cheating and deception is a very thick, web-like, nearly inexplainable phenomenon. There's a researcher in North Carolina by the name of Dan Ariely, Airley, I think, or Ly, and he's phenomenal. And he has something that he calls a quote-unquote deception lab, and he studies deception, lying, cheating, and the social psychology behind why people cheat and lie. And he studied, you know, like Bernie Madoff and Lance Armstrong. And his findings are really interesting. One of the things that has always stuck out about his work and his findings for me is that it's less about character and more about opportunity. So what's that old saying? You know, integrity is what you do when no one is looking, and then so is cheating. You know, they're opposite sides of the same coin. And it's a very layered concept of deception, but he really believes that opportunity has much more of an influence on why and when people cheat than their moral code or their integrity or their character, which I find so hard to get my head around. But then you have to think about all the influences, internal and external, and he studied those in depth. And he's got a couple of great TED Talks, and his work is just fascinating and just goes completely against our intuition. You would just think, no, someone with high moral character could never cheat. But, all the stories and all the research, everyone who studied Bernie Madoff, he was really likable, well-respected guy until he fell behind. The other thing that Dan Ariely says that's really interesting is, the first cut is the deepest. So the first lie is the most costly. And after that, it decreases in impact on the psyche exponentially. So each consecutive lie has less and less impact on you. Then it just becomes more and more natural, which is disappointing in terms of human nature. I'd like to talk to someone, whoever came up with that element, I'd like to talk to them about that.
And it becomes habitual.
Mm-hmm.
So in an athlete's career, when so much depends on it, they go into sport for all the right reasons, to win, for Olympic glory maybe, or just to win at whatever level they reach their maximum potential, whatever it may be. And their world evolves around that. So much depends on it. And yet they go off the rails because they think they can win instead of coming second.
Well, I want to challenge one of the things you said in that. You said, athletes go into sport for the right reasons. As a sports psychologist who has dealt with a ton of young athletes, I'm going to challenge that. And I think that could be, part of our problem. I don't think every athlete goes into sport, or at least remains competitive, for the right reasons. I think the amount of external, typically parental pressure, is just outstanding. I have had, young client after young client that just, can't tell their parents, hey, you know what? I don't want to be as great as you weren't.
I can understand that, yes. But I suppose this is idealistic to think that as young people we do, because we're naive and I think of my own experiences and those around me at the time, we did it because we love sports, and we didn't have, and I think it's also a cultural difference.
Well, there's
a lot more parental pressure in North America than there is in parts of Europe, certainly in England, certainly when I was growing up.
Sure, and
there was no parental pressure.
And there's also generational pressure, not to point to our young age, but when I had to get at least one in there today. But, when we were growing up in sport, there was no money in women's swimming. Nobody made money. There were no Speedo contracts. There were no television contracts. There's now a World Swimming League, and they have teams, and they're organizing competitions, and it sounds just awesome and exciting. And all the athletes make money, but that didn't exist. So why would you cheat other than for an Olympic gold? And even then, it was there were certain sports that are more culturally designed or influenced. Maybe that's probably the better word. Influenced. To cheat, the power sports, because cheating in that is much easier with steroids. Originally, blood testing was really easy to fool. In the 70s and 80s, they tested ratios. So when you took steroids, you just raised both ratios, and they didn't notice that both levels were off the chart. They didn't care about that. But if the ratio matched, then you didn't test positive. But you have all this pressure, and there's money involved, and keeping up with the Joneses, and we have so much social pressure. And if you don't have that much talent, and someone comes to you in a weak moment and says, hey, let me just stick this little needle in you a couple times a week, and you're going to go through the roof. They do it. It's you think that it's hard to make that kind of concession, but the human beings have been talked into far worse.
True. But I think sometimes we're talking about not just the individuals capitulating and their opportunity overcoming integrity. It's the systems such as the Russian system I'm thinking about now. How many times have they been punished, banned, and caught for cheating, and the systems and have been undermined. They've been exposed, and yet they still continue to come back and do it. It's just as if they cannot compete without cheating.
Yeah, that's systemic and comes from much higher up. And I think you would have to, I don't know enough about Russian and Soviet social history to understand. But if you have been on, perhaps in thinking about it for the first time, perhaps there's a regime mentality. If you look at historically the countries that have been famous for doping and cheating. So early on it was East Germany, right? So East Germany was, they were famous, especially in the 70s, the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s, for their doping and steroid use and getting away with it, like fantastically. And when I was swimming in the mid 80s, I swam on a team with the Babashoff sisters in Mission Viejo, and the youngest sister was still swimming, but Shirley Babashoff was a famous American swimmer in the 70s and never won Olympic gold because she always lost to an East German who was, it came to light later on, always doping. And then once the wall fell, the East Germans, they merged with Germany, they changed, they became a different culture. I remember the East German trainer, for the Olympic trainer, went to China. And then in the late 80s, the Chinese swimmers were all doping. And they did it briefly, because they didn't get away with it, and then they changed course. But I remember being at I think it was the 1989 U.S. Open, which was a big national level meet that we invited other countries to, so called it a U.S. Open. The series didn't last very long because it wasn't very successful. They were trying to mimic tennis and golf very obviously. But I remember being in the locker room. I was swimming at the U.S. Open in 1989, and the Chinese women won all of the sprint and power events, the 100-meter strokes, and they looked like the typical steroid profile. When a woman takes steroids, even a man, it's a little bit less noticeable facial features on a man because they have testosterone circulating at a much higher level than women anyway. But when you add that to a woman's body, they get a Cro-Magnon forehead is sort of the joke, and a larger Adam's apple, and then acne is a very typical side effect of steroid use. And that's what those Chinese women look like, deeper voices, and just power events. It wasn't the distance events, it was the power events. They got busted for it and quickly changed course. As for the Russian steroid use, I don't know, but from the top down, they are obsessed with dominance. And so if you are living in a country that is obsessed with that, then it's going to infiltrate every area. And I'm not sure how that changes course.
What's a Cro-Magnon forehead?
So if you think about the Neanderthal Cro-Magnon, it's sort of a joke, but it's a thickening across the brow, and I'm not sure why it happens with steroid use, but that was always the joke, in the 80s. Oh, steroids? Yeah, look at the forehead. It's if you think about what a Neanderthal or a caveman looked like, their forehead was a little bit slanted back because they had, at least a Neanderthal didn't have the frontal lobe that the Homo sapien developed. And so the brow, right across the brow, was thicker. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah. Yes, it does. And I'm going to be attuned to these symptoms now.
Even
I doubt I'll see the acne on TV, but maybe the Adam's apple.
Well, my gym, even the gym where I go and do my exercise and resistance training, there's a couple of guys there that are just so very obviously using steroids, and they're not competitive. They're just guys trying to feel better about themselves. But that's a double-edged sword. How do you feel better about yourself if you're cheating to look better? I don't know how that, like that's a huge,
Yeah, that's a conundrum.
it's a huge trade-off.
Dichotomy.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, plus what steroid use does to sex drive and genitalia in men is not very favorable.
Okay, we don't need to go there.
Not on a women's sports thing. Yeah.
Okay. Let's focus. So does it affect the sex drive of women then?
I don't actually know. Okay. I know that it reduces it in men. It also reduces genitalia size in men, which is ironic.
Okay, it is. And in terms of repeat offenders, though, with cheating, what's the psychology behind that?
I think you can talk yourself into anything. And if you are competing, in whatever you're competing at, I mean, the stock market is highly competitive, and traders often become very addicted to substances to keep them up and keep them wired and keep them going so that they can continue to be, punchy and ready to trade. It's not very different. It's just not a physical exertion for their competitive performance. But if there's sort of a tipping point that I think people cross when you lose sight of, first of all, why you compete. And if that's not very strong, like if you have a young person who's competing under pressure from their parent for approval or love, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but I have seen it countless times, then you get into big trouble and you get very stuck with regards to how do I win. And then the goal replaces sort of the value system, the meaning. And if you're obsessed with obtaining one thing, which is winning or a gold medal, or like Lance Armstrong, being the best, and everybody's doing it. There's lots of, in Icarus, it was very interesting. I can't remember the U.S. cyclist who came clean and was sort of at the center of the fall of doping in cycling. I can't remember his name, but he couldn't compete. And then one of the big convincing factors for him was everyone was doing it. So if the playing field is not level, you'll never know how good you are. And for a lot of of people, that's an impossible concept to settle into psychologically. Like, if you can't ever figure out if you're any good, how do you create self-worth or value? And athletes typically are very, their identity is completely wrapped up in their sport. Rightly so. I mean, like when you meet, especially in North America, when you meet someone, what's the first thing you ask them? What do you do? Well, and you don't say, I practice law, I'm a lawyer. You don't say, I practice medicine. You say, I'm a doctor. It's, the way that we say it, for, however many decades I was the swimmer. I'll still meet some of my parents' friends, my dad's friends especially. Oh, you were the swimmer. Yeah, 30 years ago. But that's how we identify in this country. And so that makes it very, very powerful. So if your identity is wrapped up in one thing, then you've got to be really good at it, or you've got to shift and find a new identity, which is very challenging.
Moving on to other forms of cheating now, I'm thinking of, equipment that is doctored in some way to produce, an improved performance. But it's cheating at the end of the day, and different sports obviously have different ways of doing that. I guess, and I don't know, I am guessing that there may be more ways you can dodge the system there. You can get away with it. Maybe not permanently, but I don't know what the psychology would be behind that, thinking, well, I'll give it a go, other people have got away with it.
I think that, so the only one that really comes to mind, I hate to say this, is, what was it, Inflategate? the Patriots and
yes.
changing using the balls differently and changing and of course there's so much controversy surrounding that, but let's say they did.
It happens in cricket.
Okay.
Cricket is another fine example, how they doctor the ball.
Okay. So here in North America, that's not something we relate to, but okay, great. So it's something that happens. I think that that when, the psychology of that would have to be, a lifelong feeling of I've got to be better. I've got to be better. I've got to be better. A lot of the young athletes that I work with will talk about one or both of their parental figures putting just, unimaginable stress on them to be better, be better, be better. Go watch any youth sport event, and there will always be a parent who is screaming their head off, veins popping out of their neck at their kid who could be 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 years old in irrational, unimaginable, just stupid ways. So you have these young minds that are not even close to halfway developed. If you think about developmental psychology, they say that the brain doesn't fully come online until 22 to 24 years old. So you have these kids coming up the ranks, as impressionable and malleable as you can possibly imagine, and they're being told that they're not good enough. And so if you have a personal schemata, or vision of yourself that it comes from not being good enough, someone saying, hey, this is going to make you better or great, why wouldn't you jump at that? And then, it's typically, you have a ringleader, you look at all the different, especially if you look at the story of Icarus, there's always a ringleader. There's always one person who's, I'm going to make money on this. And people don't think they're going to get caught. Getting caught is not a deterrent, right? The death penalty is the dumbest idea of a deterrent in the world, because there is absolutely no research that shows that someone goes in to murder someone and says, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this because I don't have any mitigating circumstances, so this is really going to qualify for the death penalty. People don't think about that.
No, quite. That's true.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when
there's not that kind of logic thinking before committing a crime.
No, or before cheating. Someone tells you if you are vulnerable enough to be considering cheating, and someone tells you, don't worry, we're not going to get caught, of course you're going to believe that. If your state system is telling you, you have to do this, I don't care if we get caught, then you do it anyway, so you trade, what kind of life, you sell your soul to the devil. It's surprising to some people and just very ordinary and sensical to others.
I guess especially if you're part of some systemic, long-term, it is a plan. It's the bigger picture. It's it's what's expected of you if you're part of that system. The other side of this, of course, is if you are somehow coerced into cheating, and then you suffer the consequences with a lifetime ban, the impact on that, or even a temporary ban. We've talked about last year about a couple of athletes, Jamaican athlete and a South African athlete who were facing a ban that would put them out of the next Olympics. And that was ostensibly, and I don't know the actual facts of this, so I'm paraphrasing, that they were punished for cheating and they were unaware that there was this a banned substance in their medication, in regular over-the-counter medication. But the consequences to them as athletes of being banned, that must have a really big psychological hit on them. And certainly then coming back into the sport, even if they were cleared, it's still a cloud over them for life, isn't it?
It is and it isn't. If you think about it, it really depends. I think it depends on the sport, and it depends on the system, and it depends on where you go after that. So in 1988, Angel Myers Martino won everything that she swam at the Olympic trials, and tested positive for nandrolone, and she won the 50 free, she won the 100 free, and she won the 100 fly, and she broke American records I can't remember exactly. But it was, and it was pretty obvious, right? She had been, like sort of hovering around the national team for a while. Then she married an Olympic weightlifter and walked onto the deck and disappeared for a year, walked onto the deck at Olympic trials and was just massive. Like she was just huge. I mean, it was just so obvious. And then when she got busted, she served a 2-year ban. I think she came back and swam one meet and then disappeared from swimming for forever. So yes, I imagine that getting caught could just take such an enormous toll on the psyche that I can't even imagine. I'm not sure what she did. I didn't know her at all. I had no relationship with her. She was, when I would see her at swim meets before 1988, she always seemed pleasant and nice, and I had never had a second thought about her with regards to her personality or who she was. And I don't know how you recover from that. I think that in Icarus, the coming clean, I wish I could remember his name, when he came clean and started to testify and reveal everything that he knew, that was part of his process for him. And so I suspect that it really depends on how you handle it. Like you have getting caught and banned either, temporarily or for life. Then you're in one of those moments where you get to choose how you shift. You get to choose. Like a really good friend whose son just graduated from college, just got his first job, made a major social media mistake and got fired in his first week, not even a week at his job. And I said to my friend, this could be the best, worst day of his life if he turns it around. He now has this opportunity, because what does he say in his next job interview? He says, I messed up and here's what I've learned from it. And thank goodness I learned it so early in the game before it cost me my career. It cost him his first job after a week. He can change course and take responsibility and
yeah, it's living with it.
It is.
That's the conscience of living it. I think, it would just haunt me. I can't imagine. I mean, it's like, stepping over the law, just crossing the line, maybe a speeding or a parking ticket or minor things,
right.
or shoplifting or, doing something that just to me, it would haunt me.
Well, there's
I couldn't live it.
Just, yeah, and there are things that
people have different consciences, right?
Well, they do, and then there's things that are mentally acceptable, and we tend to line up our identity and our vision of ourselves. We line that up with external things, not internal. That is very, 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 Western culture. I remember when I lived in LA. The funny thing in LA was people's cars were always parked in the driveway, and they'd say there was more money on the, on the four wheels on the driveway than in the car, than in the in the garage. It's just, it was always about your zip code, where you lived, what you drove, where you worked. It's all external stuff, and we're very stuck in that in Western culture, and so it's how do we shift that? There's some people talking about character, and my former mentor Jim Lair wrote a book called The Only Way to Win, and it was all about winning with character, and now he's moving that into youth sports. How do we leverage our participation in youth sports, both as parents and as young athletes? How do we leverage that to create a conversation for better character and create character? The Journal of Applied Sports Psychology this month is an issue that is all about coaches. And so one of the articles is called Moral Exemplar College Coaches, and it was coaches who care. And they found they went through and had people nominate, and they found 8 college coaches who were moral exemplars. And it was, it was really hard. So Jim Aiken, former head coach of University of Oregon football in the early 1950s, said, quote, "If you have to choose between breaking the rules and losing games, wouldn't it be better to break the rules? If you lose your games, you're certain to be fired. But if you break the rules, you have to get caught to be fired," end quote. So perhaps,
okay. Yes, yeah.
right?
Right.
So perhaps that then leans us toward risk profile, right? So psychologically, people have risk aversion or risk acceptance. And if you are like, I have a very low risk profile, I am not a big risk taker. So then, but I know some people who are big risk takers. So perhaps that lends to it.
I would say I'm a big risk taker.
Okay, well, there
in life, when I think what I've done.
Right.
Yeah, I will make a big leap.
In certain areas, though, like risk is not like across the board. Some people are willing to take deep financial risks and zero relationship risks. So it's situation specific.
I'm the other way around.
Okay, well, there you go. So that's, so I'm sure that there's a lot that weaves into it, and then, this coaching issue has been very, very interesting to start to, I just got it in the mail on Friday, so I haven't really had a chance to dive into it. But that quote stuck out to me. And then you think about the coaches that you follow. Like I went to UCLA. And so the coaching model came from John Wooden. And it was just profound and very different. And across town was USC, and their coaching models were different. And they didn't have, not every college or not every program has a John Wooden to aspire to or to lean on or to build a foundation from. And, then you have successful programs, and winning is very, very important. Unfortunately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Winning at all costs is sometimes all that they can aspire to. So I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode. And you've given me ideas for more subjects to cover. We always do.
And the thing, like if you are in a leadership or a coaching role and are listening to this, the thing to refer to first and foremost is your philosophy and your leadership action taking. Do you walk your talk? The old "do as I say, not as I do" is the biggest load of rubbish that you can possibly imagine. Nobody does that. We watch. We have mirror neurons. So we are designed, to learn by watching others. So it's very problematic to use languaging to try and convey behavioral expectations. So we watch what others do, much more so, and it creates a huge conflict internally for someone. So if you're in a leadership role, like, how do you behave? What are you modeling? And what's your philosophy? And how do you shore that up? How do you get more strength for yourself so that your integrity can grow, so that your moral code becomes stronger, so that winning at all costs changes to, working to win? And those are hard questions. Those are hard things to look at. Like that coach from that quote, or the quote from that coach is, it's a huge moral conundrum for a coach. You have to win because coaching performance is based on that.
Totally. Your livelihood is at stake. Lots to think about there. Same for the athletes, and then we come back to cheating. So is it all about the winning or the journey? Jenny, always interesting conversations. I love these, and I love how spontaneous we can be. We just a minute before we turn on the microphone, pull it out the hat, and you can. So thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
That was fun. Thanks.
And I think we can take some of these things that we've touched on and discuss them a little bit more in future episodes here on the Mind Matters. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. And in the meanwhile, you can follow Jenny and her blog where? drjenny.com, just drjenny.com.
On Facebook, Dr. Jenny R. Susser, and on Twitter, Dr. Jenny Susser.
And if you have any comments about this or other episodes here, you can always leave them on our Facebook page at Wisp Sports and follow us on other social media channels at Wisp Sports. We always love to hear from you. If you feel like getting your email out and dropping us a line, then info@wispsports is where you can reach us. So we will forward all questions to Jenny because she's the expert amongst us. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, Jenny, thank you as always. And anything exciting happening in Florida in the next couple of weeks?
It's going to go down to 30 degrees tomorrow night, so that's exciting for us.
And it's probably 30 degrees right now as we are recording in the morning here in Virginia. So we like to share the love.
Well, thank you. I now know who to blame.
All right. A couple of weeks we'll be back with another episode of The Mind Matters. Until then, thank you for listening and helping us turn up the volume on women's sports. Goodbye for now.